The first swing of the hammer echoed like thunder, trapped in wood. The old mansion stood at the end of a rain-slick road, its windows blinded by years of dust and vines that curled around its bones like veins. No one had stepped inside since the fire that gutted its east wing 3 decades ago, and even the street dogs refused to linger near its gates. Yet, as the crew pried up the first plank, the house exhaled, a sigh so low and long it felt like it came from beneath the ground. The smell of damp earth and something older rose up, thick and sweet like spoiled fruit. Mateo told them it was just rot, but even he couldn't stop glancing at the floor as if waiting for it to breathe again. By morning, the house had changed its breath. It no longer sighed in intervals, it whispered. The crew arrived under the bruised dawn sky, their boots echoing on the old tiles as if the mansion itself were repeating every step half a second late. Jamar refused to enter first this time. He swore the boards had shifted overnight, that he'd heard footsteps pacing while they slept in the quarters out back. Mateo brushed him off, but the fatigue in his eyes betrayed him. The scent of wet soil still lingered, and from somewhere beneath the floor came a single sound. A knock, too deliberate to be the settling of wood. The sound returned as they worked. Rhythmic, patient, intelligent. Every nail driven into the new planks was answered by a faint tap from beneath, echoing the hammer's rhythm like a mockery. Isabella crouched beside the boards, pressing her ear close. The wood pulsed faintly, with warmth, like a heartbeat. For a moment she thought she could make out words, ancient syllables, muffled by earth. Thomas murmured a prayer, and Jomar dropped his tool, his eyes wide as a child's. Mateo barked in order to continue, but his voice cracked, and everyone heard it. When the lights failed, it was sudden. A single blink, and then total dark. The hum of the generator faltered, replaced by the slick hiss of rain outside. Someone whispered a name. No one admitted who. The only illumination came from the flame of Tomas's lighter, trembling as though caught in a breeze that didn't exist. The floorboards underfoot seemed to shift, expanding with a groan like lungs filling after too long without air. Then came the sound again. Not from below this time, but within the walls, soft and wet, like hands dragging along the inside of the plaster. The generator roared back to life with a sputter, flooding the hall with pale, fluorescent light. In the harsh glare, they saw what they'd missed. Muddy handprints on the walls. Small and smudged, leading from the floorboards toward the door. Isabella's lips trembled as she whispered that they looked fresh. Mateo moved closer, his boots leaving shallow impressions in the soil, now seeping up through the cracks. For a moment, the house fell silent. Then came a long, shivering wail that rose from beneath the floor, too human to be dismissed, too impossible to explain. By the third day, the house had begun to smell of rust and rain. The boards near the entryway swelled with dampness, the air dense with metallic humidity. Mateo insisted on progress, driving the crew to work faster, but each blow of the hammer echoed through the structure like it was traveling down a hollow spine. Isabella's notes had turned frantic. Sketches of the mansion's layout littered with circles and underlined words. Crypt, foundation, offering. Beneath it all, the whispering had grown constant, weaving into the rhythm of their movements. Sometimes it sounded like prayer. Sometimes it sounded like laughter. They found the first relic just before noon, a pouch sewn from dried leather, blackened with age. Inside, Thomas discovered coins fused together, etched with symbols none of them could recognize. Isabella's voice trembled as she identified them, colonial-era Salapai coins used as payment for the dead. Jomar muttered that they should return them to the soil, but Mateo pocketed one, insisting they were evidence for the restoration's historical record. The others watched in silence as the house seemed to darken around them, as if disapproving. By afternoon, the temperature inside the mansion had dropped. Every breath came out white. Tools began to stick to their hands, the metal biting with unnatural chill. When Jomar pried up another plank near the central beam, the ground beneath was slick. Not with water, but something darker, thicker. The smell was faintly sweet, like iron and decay. Then came a faint tremor underfoot, followed by a sigh so deep it made the lamp chains sway. The floor rippled. They froze, listening. From below came a muffled chorus of whispers, layered and low. Voices speaking in a language none of them knew. The day died early. Clouds rolled over the mansion, swallowing what little light remained. Mateo ordered the hole sealed for the night, but Thomas refused to drive another nail. His eyes were bloodshot, his lips cracked from murmured prayers. Isabella whispered that they shouldn't have disturbed what was buried, that the coins were not relics, but offerings, seals meant to keep the dead silent. Mateo turned sharply to silence her, but in that moment the boards shuddered beneath their feet, and from below came a single, drawn-out sob that silenced them all. The night that followed was long and heavy, filled with restless air and unspoken fear. Jamar couldn't sleep. He returned to the hall, drawn by the whispering that threaded through the storm outside. The voices were clearer now, pleading, chanting, alive. He leaned closer to the open gap, the flashlight trembling in his hand. Then, just as lightning split the sky, something reached up from the dark. Not solid, not smoke, but a shape that shimmered between both and touched his cheek with a sound like wet silk. Jomar screamed, and every light in the mansion went out at once. The scream that night didn't stop when the light returned. It bled through every wall, every window, rising and falling like the tide. By dawn, the sound had thinned into a low weeping that came from everywhere and nowhere. The crew gathered in the hall, hollow-eyed and silent. The boards where Jomar had stood were wet with something that steamed faintly in the morning light. Isabella's voice shook as she said his name, but there was no answer. Mateo ordered a search, though his own voice betrayed that he already knew. Jomar was gone. And the hole they had sealed the night before now pulsed open again, as if breathing. The weeping grew louder as the day wore on. Not a sound of grief, but of something trapped too long. Isabella pressed her recorder to the floor, and when she played it back, the audio was layered with whispers. Dozens of voices crying in unison, one phrase repeating in a forgotten dialect. She sent the file to a linguist friend at the university, but the message never went through. Every phone, every radio, every signal inside the mansion failed. It was as if the house itself swallowed their words before they could escape. That night, Thomas woke to the sound of someone hammering. He rose from his cot, following the rhythmic strikes through the corridor. The hall was empty, yet the sound continued, steady, methodical, coming from beneath the floor. As he knelt, the hammering stopped, replaced by a single voice, low and guttural, murmuring what sounded like a prayer. He whispered one in return. The boards beneath his hand grew warm. When he pulled back, his palm was streaked with fresh blood seeping from between the planks. Mateo stopped pretending by morning. The mansion had turned hostile. Every tool he touched felt heavier, every corner darker than it should be. The floor bulged like a heartbeat beneath their boots. Isabella said she'd found an old record in the archives. The house had once been a convent before it became a plantation home. Dozens of workers had vanished during its construction. The priest overseeing it had been accused of witchcraft and sealed alive inside its foundations. The realization came too late. The house wasn't haunted. It was alive, and it was remembering. That evening, as the storm returned, the floor began to weep. Thick streaks of muddy water leaked from the seams, pooling around their boots. The whispering turned into cries, hundreds of them, filling every inch of air. Isabella screamed for it to stop, but the sound swallowed her voice. Mateo fell to his knees, hands clamped over his ears. Through the roar of the storm and the sobs rising from the ground, Thomas shouted a single word. Forgive! The boards cracked beneath him, and the earth below gave a sigh that carried every voice with it, a mournful, terrible sound that shook the house to its core. The rain did not stop for 3 days. The city outside vanished behind curtains of water, and inside the mansion the air reeked of metal and mold. The floorboards, warped and breathing, had begun to sweat. When Mateo stepped on them, the damp wood exhaled in a sigh that almost formed a word. They no longer spoke of Jomar. The silence around his name was heavier than prayer. Thomas had begun marking crosses on the walls with ash. Isabella had taken to writing feverishly, her notes frantic, pages soaked with humidity and fear. None of them dared to sleep. The cries below had turned rhythmic, almost steady, the sound of something remembering how to rise. They uncovered the hole again at dusk. The air that poured out was cold enough to frost the edges of their tools. Beneath the planks, the soil was slick, glistening and alive with a faint movement, something like the shift of muscle under skin. Isabella leaned closer, her flashlight trembling. Embedded in the earth were bones, but not white and dry. Dark, glistening, still wet. Her stomach twisted as she saw nails hammered through some of them. The bones were arranged deliberately, in a circle. Mateo whispered that it looked like a seal. Thomas corrected him softly, a cage. When they pulled one of the bones free, the entire house groaned. The walls flexed, the ceiling beams popped like knuckles. A fine rain of plaster fell, as if the mansion itself were exhaling dust from its lungs. Mateo stumbled back, bone in hand, staring in disbelief as warmth bled from it like fresh blood. The bone trembled, slick and pulsing faintly. Isabella screamed for him to drop it, but it was already too late. The whispering below swelled into a roar, hundreds of voices crying out, layered and furious. For a heartbeat, the floor rippled like the surface of the sea. The floor cracked open. It wasn't an explosion. It was a slow, wet sound, like skin tearing under pressure. Beneath the splintering boards was a pit, deeper than it should have been, walls slick with black soil and glistening roots. A shape moved far below, human, but not. The whispering turned to screams, begging and accusing all at once. Isabella backed away, her heel catching on the broken planks as she fell. Mateo reached to help her, but the floor shifted between them like a living thing, swallowing his arm to the elbow before spitting him free. His skin was cold and gray where it had touched the void. They tried to flee. The front door would not open. Every window showed only darkness beyond the glass. No rain, no sky. The house had sealed itself. The whispering became laughter, high, shrill, echoing from the floorboards and the ceiling alike. The floor pulsed with rhythm now, beating like a second heart. Thomas stumbled toward the altar room, clutching his rosary, shouting for mercy. The walls dripped. Isabella screamed as the crucifix on the wall began to bleed from its nailed hands, rivulets snaking down to the floor. Mateo turned toward the stairs, but each step seemed to breathe, alive, watching. By dawn, the house was silent again. The storm had passed, leaving only the soft hiss of dripping water and the faint creak of the mansion breathing. Mateo sat against the wall, clutching his arm, the gray stains spreading up to his shoulder like mold. Isabella moved through the hall in a trance, her recorder still running, capturing the faint echoes that drifted from below. Not whispers now, but something like chanting. Thomas was gone. They'd found his rosary at the foot of the altar, beads melted into the wood. Isabella's voice trembled as she read aloud from her notes. The workers buried alive beneath the mansion's foundation were bound by ritual, their suffering sealed into the structure itself. The mansion wasn't haunted. It was built from the dead. The chanting grew louder as the day wore on, filling the walls like the echo of trapped lungs. Isabella traced the blueprints she'd uncovered, realizing the mansion's design formed a sigil, the foundations aligning with ancient burial mounds beneath the city. Each nail, each beam was placed according to the pattern. The Spanish priest had not built a home. He'd built a vessel. Mateo's breathing had grown shallow, his voice hoarse. He said the house wasn't trying to kill them. It was trying to finish what it had started centuries ago, to rebuild itself, piece by piece, bone by bone. The air grew thick and metallic. When Isabella touched the wall, it was warm. Beneath the plaster, she could feel something shifting. Veins pulsing faintly. She followed the warmth to the cellar door, half-rotted and chained shut. Mateo tried to stop her, but his words came out in broken gasps, his mouth trembling as if the house spoke through him. She unlatched the chain. The air that escaped was foul and cold, yet she felt drawn downward, as though gravity had deepened. The chanting now came clearly from below. Dozens of voices in agony, woven together into one endless, pleading tone. The cellar was a womb of stone and soil. The walls were slick, covered in tangled roots that pulsed faintly with light. In the center lay a mound of black earth, shaped like a human body, the wood of the foundation beams crossing it like ribs. Isabella fell to her knees, realizing the truth. The house foundation wasn't symbolic. It was literal. A man's corpse had been built into the earth, its heart still faintly beating. Mateo stumbled behind her, his body shaking violently. When he spoke, the voice that came out was not his. It was older, deeper. The house had found its voice. The voice that came through Mateo wasn't in words, but in emotion. Centuries of agony compressed into one trembling breath. Isabella clutched her ears, yet the sound filled her head from within. Images flooded her mind. Chained workers entombed beneath the mansion. The priest blessing the soil with blood. The screams swallowed by the wet earth. The house had never stopped hungering. Now, through Mateo, it spoke its final demand. Finish it. As his eyes rolled white, the floor above began to move, nails pulling free as the mansion's bones groaned awake once more. The mansion convulsed as the foundation awakened. Each beam shrieked. Every nail screamed as if torn from the marrow of something alive. Isabella dragged Mateo up the cellar steps, his body twitching, eyes rolling back into his skull. The whispering had grown into a chant. Hundreds of voices calling one name. The name of the priest who had sealed them here. The walls wept dark water, streaked with blood, and the air tasted of salt and ash. The front door had vanished, replaced by smooth plaster. Every exit was gone. The mansion was closing its own wounds, and they were inside them. Upstairs, the floor had transformed. Where there was once wood, there was now a surface that gleamed darkly, veined like flesh. Mateo awoke mid-drag, gasping, his voice layered, two tones speaking at once. He told Isabella the house was almost complete, that it needed one more sacrifice. His hand seized her wrist, eyes glowing faintly from within. She screamed and tore free, running across the hall that now pulsed under her feet like a living organ. Each step she took was answered by the floor breathing in. The house's voice filled the air now. Not through words, but through vibration, through the shifting of the walls and the quivering of the floor. It begged for completion. Isabella ran to the altar room where the last patch of untouched wood remained. The crucifix there had melted, its figure twisted into something unrecognizable. She lifted a nail from the debris, one of the old handmade spikes used in the floor's restoration. The whispering grew frantic. She realized what the house wanted. The same ritual that began its creation. It needed her blood to end its hunger, or to feed it forever. Mateo appeared in the doorway, but he was no longer Mateo. His body moved with a stiff, unnatural grace, his expression calm, almost peaceful. His voice was a chorus, male and female, old and young, echoing as one. He thanked her for returning the voice to the house. Isabella backed toward the wall, clutching the nail. The floor rippled outward from his feet, roots spreading like veins across the tiles. "One nail," he said, to finish the prayer. She screamed his name, but it wasn't his to answer anymore. The final sound was not a scream, but a sigh. Isabella drove the nail through the pulsing floor, into her palm, binding her blood to the wood. The house shuddered violently, beams groaning, windows exploding inward, a whirlwind of dust and screams. Mateo fell to his knees, eyes rolling back, the light inside him extinguishing. The mansion's cries rose to a deafening crescendo, then ceased. Silence fell heavy and absolute. When the dust settled, Isabella was gone. Only her blood remained, seeping into the planks. The house, at last, was still. Morning came, though the sun could not touch the house. The mansion stood shrouded in gray, its windows blind, its silence absolute. The rain had stopped, but the air was thick with the smell of soil and iron. Mateo awoke on the cold floor of the altar room, weak, the taste of rust in his mouth. Isabella was gone. Her notes lay scattered, pages soaked in blood, each one marked with the same phrase written over and over. The earth remembers. He crawled toward the hole where she had fallen, but the boards were sealed again, smooth and pale, as if freshly built. Beneath them something faintly moved, a slow, rhythmic breath. Mateo stumbled outside at last. The gates stood open, the world beyond bright and untouched. Birds singing, traffic murmuring, life continuing. Yet the mansion behind him loomed in silence, its walls darker, its edges somehow softer, as though it had exhaled after a long sleep. He collapsed in the mud, gasping. The mark on his arm had faded, replaced by faint, wood-grain patterns beneath his skin. The wind carried with it a low hum, familiar, steady, the rhythm of hammer and nail. He looked back once more, and for a heartbeat, the windows of the mansion blinked. The restoration halted. The mansion was declared unsafe, condemned, fenced off by authorities who refused to enter after hearing the sounds at night. Faint hammering, muffled cries, and sometimes a woman's voice humming from within. Mateo tried to tell them what happened, but the story always came out fragmented. He spoke of voices, of a ritual, of Isabella's sacrifice, but no one believed him. They called it trauma, hallucination. Yet, when he closed his eyes, he saw her beneath the planks, her face calm, her eyes open, whispering a lullaby meant for the dead. Months passed. The mansion was sold quietly to a foreign investor planning a luxury hotel. The workers who entered never stayed long. Each complained of strange knocking beneath the floors. When inspectors arrived, they found new boards laid perfectly across the grand hall, pale, untouched, and strangely warm to the touch. Beneath them, the soil was undisturbed. Yet when they drove the first nail into the wood, a faint sigh rose from below. Soft, familiar, like someone breathing in relief. At night, the house sings again. Beneath the perfect new floorboards, voices murmur in harmony. Sorrowful, endless, and joined by one newly soft and human, Isabella's. She hums an old folk melody now, her tone laced with something like peace, though the others still weep beneath her. The mansion gleams under the moonlight, reborn and waiting, its heart once more complete. And deep below, in the earth that remembers, the last nail holds steady, pulsing faintly, like a heartbeat refusing to die.